Welcome to this session of Closing the Gap, Moving Critical Regulated Workloads to AWS. And I'm really happy to see all of you here. When they first told me what slot I was having, 5:30, the slot right before the party, I thought, first I was thinking, well, no one's going to be there. But then I thought, the people that are going to be there are going to be absolutely dedicated. You guys are the ones that have the mental stamina to stay through all the sessions today and yesterday, and you're still here. So I hope this is going to be a good session. That's right. We got some coffee cereal back there. Instead of having coffee for everybody to keep you awake, coffee cereal back there on the table, and we really don't want to take it home. So if you want to take as many bags as you want on the way out, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, so not sure how to get back to my presentation here. Alvin? All right, so while Alvin's doing that, I look back about a year ago. A year ago, we had, I did a presentation on the security and control governance features of AWS at this re:Invent conference a year ago today. At that time, I had no idea about the amount of progress we were going to see in 2014, the progress that we gained from these kind of features that we provide in AWS in the world of auditors, regulators, those that are really concerned about securing and validating the cloud as secure. We've really moved the needle there, I think, this year, and we're seeing that we're giving a lot of non-technical stakeholders the ability to look into an AWS account, really see how they're securing that account and being able to audit it and get some transparency there. We're also seeing auditors getting cloud savvy. This year, especially, a lot of auditors are finally deciding they are going to learn about the cloud, learn how to audit customers or clients that are in a cloud environment, and we're seeing a lot of uptick in understanding and not so much fear about the cloud itself. Today we're going to talk about this unique aspect of the cloud, how to move critical workloads to an IT environment in which an auditor is not familiar. I'd like to talk about some of the cool tools and features that we have that you can use to get ready for or facilitate the move of these regulated workloads to AWS. So for a quick definition, just when I say regulated or critical workloads, I mean any workload that's considered critical to running the business, workloads that are audited by external auditors or other external authorities, like independent auditors or industry regulators, and critical workloads whose failure will materially impair the business, and workloads that process like financial information or business operations information. So I've been with Amazon for 4.5 years or so. I was the first one to join the program for the auditing and attestation group, and I built the program from the ground up. And the default position on auditors and moving regulated regulated data to the cloud has been, up until probably earlier this year, just automatic no. We're not going to allow you to. That's just crazy. They make it equivalent to, or if you say I'm going to move regulated workloads or data to the cloud, traditionally they would think, well, that means you're exposing it to the internet. You're opening it up so everybody on the internet can access your database and access your information. But as companies realize the improved security and operation, there's the operational performance. You'll hear that all day long from all the sessions about the IT operational efficiencies, but the security controls that are also come with the services. The benefits of those are exceeding the on-premise capability. So I think that as companies realize this, and auditors and regulators realize this, they'll want to move more of these critical regulated workloads into AWS Cloud. This creates, moving regulated data to the cloud. Anybody here challenged with this? Raise your hand. Oh, good. Wow, see what I mean? Like almost everyone raised their hand. This is the kind of audience I like to see. And for you guys, I got, one row apiece here. So I appreciate you again for coming. Okay, so in general, why is this so hard? I mean, in general, it's just tough. Like, exact requirements of regulations aren't specific. As you know, a regulation might be something as high level as make sure you manage risk, or you manage your risk commensurate to what you're putting in the cloud, or what you're putting to giving to a subcontractor. So because there's so much personal judgment or ambiguity into what that actually means technically, that's where you've got like everybody with different opinions, different backgrounds, different experience, what they think is risky versus what they've had experience with a specific threat, so they think that's the most risky thing. They have experience with different kinds of audit programs. This is all very variable and relies on a lot of judgment. And the fact is that the people like the IT people, they don't like this. They don't like all the judgment and the ambiguity around regulation. They just say, well, I'm used to if-then statements, so tell me what I have to build, and I will build it, and the outcome will be perfect, and I can control that with software. So this is why this is in general really tough. In fact, in July, Forbes reported on a story about a major technology company's view of regulated workloads. I've removed the name of the company, but you probably can figure it out in a minute. The company's two co-founders were asked whether the tech giant could become, in part, a health company. And their response was basically no. One of the co-founders said, quote, "Generally, health is just so heavily regulated. It's just a painful business to be in. It's not necessarily how I want to spend my time. I think the regulatory burden on the US is so high that I think it would dissuade a lot of entrepreneurs." So the author of this article then said, "It's pretty amazing that a company that doesn't think twice about tackling absurdly challenging scientific projects is brought to its knees by the prospect of dealing with the Byzantine regulation around healthcare." I mean, that's a pretty impressive statement, and it's true. Like I said, engineers they don't want to deal with the ambiguity here and the difficulties around everything that comes with educating an entire group of people in all different kind of companies, the regulators, the auditors themselves. So in general, just dealing with this tough. Second, the cloud is new. Andy said in his keynote yesterday that the cloud is the biggest shift in our lifetimes. And besides not being able to define what the cloud is, and I really think that auditors weren't able to figure out what it was until probably last year when they all started to kind of get it. When they deal with a new technology, it impacts their audits. They have to evaluate what it means, and they have to really understand it, because if they don't take the right approach to managing risk, then they could get in trouble. So the other thing is subcontracting. Subcontracting is it's common, of course, today, but there's different rules for different kinds of subcontractors. Commercial off-the-shelf software is treated differently from a subcontracting relationship as is like a managed service provider or a traditional hosting environment. So the fact that we're delivering what would be considered COTS software through a subcontracting type of vehicle is confusing to them, and it's difficult to figure out what regulations apply. Another thing is direct regulation versus delegation. In some industries, you can delegate compliance. For example, PCI. If you use a validated service provider like AWS, we will take on some of the responsibilities for complying with PCI, and we'll take them on completely. Like all the physical requirement 9, all the physical security parts of the PCI DSS, we take on. We actually, our customers are assigning that burden of compliance to us directly, and they rely on it. In some industries, they're not able to do that. In the financial industry, you cannot delegate compliance, regulatory compliance, to a subcontractor. You can't. And so in that case, there's different things that you have to do to make sure that you are compliant all the way through. Like a bank needs to be compliant through all their subcontractors, and they have to manage it accordingly. So direct regulation versus delegation is difficult. Potential exposure, there's, if there's a breach that's public or fines, there's always the HIPAA wall of shame, where they post everybody that's had a breach of 500 or more records on their website, like forever. They never take it down. So there's some issues there. And then there's the auditor frame of mind, and I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm a recovering auditor. I worked for Ernst & Young for 12 years, and I did audits and security reviews. The same as last year. Actually, we have a name for the same as last year people in this frame of mind. We call them SALY, S-A-L-Y, same as last year. These people are, I don't know if you know this, but if you do an audit, basically what they do is they take last year's work papers and they do a file save as, and then they just go through and update it based on the new information they received during their audit. The problem with that is the fact that, if you've got something big and different and unknown, it causes them to step back and have to seriously reevaluate their audit program, which auditors generally don't like to do. And so I think that, you say something like, oh, we're moving our critical data analytics to SAP HANA on AWS. That's going to cause an auditor to completely flip out and react in like doing additional procedures or telling you can't do that. And so this kind of frame of mind is something, even if it makes sense, and even if you can demonstrate better security, it creates a lot of extra work. Interpretation of standards. There's something, the interpretation of standards is something that I discussed in a bit, but again, the guidelines are a little vague. The OCC has said in their OCC 2013-29 document titled Risk Management Guidance says a bank should adopt risk management processes commensurate with the level of risk and complexity of its third-party relationships. So what does that mean? Like, what's the variability of that? Like, that's an ocean of variability on how you're going to actually do that and demonstrate that you've done it effectively. Technical theory. The big four firms especially do have a problem with this. They hire straight out of college. These students coming out of college and then going into the environment have never done any IT operations. They've never administered a Unix environment. They've never done anything that would require them to scale a business or administer an active any kind of an environment of permissions. So this is a problem too, because then you're talking about things with which the auditor themselves are not very familiar. Then there's FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This is a common tactic. You've all been to conferences where the tactic of the vendor or the advisor is to bring up all these risks, and then either their tool helps solve the problem or their advisory services help solve the problem. And that's a way to sell services, of course, but for someone who doesn't buy all these services or buy all the tools, and especially if you're an auditor with no real tactical experience, it makes it difficult to understand and weed through what's real and what's not and what applies to your environment. To help our audit and regulators this audience of auditors, regulators, those who are governance stakeholders. We at AWS have been innovating in not only IT operation and scalability capabilities, but also with security and governance. We are trying to innovate to make the lives of the IT auditors easier as well. So our goal is to give our customers the confidence to run sensitive workloads in AWS by providing them with the assurance of our own security practices that we do in the back with our behind the scenes with our certs, but by primarily giving them the capabilities to manage security and control in their own environments. So first, it's no secret that AWS innovates. Andy said, as of today, we have 422 releases, and Andy said in his keynote yesterday that this year we're going to exit with over 500 new services and features that are released this year. It's mind-boggling, considering that last year we did 280, and we thought that was astronomical, which it is. But as you can see, that over 40% of those releases relate to security. They're relating to the security capabilities of our customers. Some of these are AWS Config and Key Management Services, which were released this week, Amazon S3 server-side encryption with customer-provided keys, single sign-on to AWS Management Console, sharing AWS CloudTrail logs between accounts, Amazon Workspaces added support for multi-factor authentication. It's these kind of features that help you secure your environment better and really give you more capability than you might have on premise. So I'm going to talk about some of these services now. These are just a few I'm going to highlight because I think it directly relates to your ability to move these regulated workloads to AWS. First off, the first thing I want to say is, and I've been talking to customers all week, a lot of times it's amazing to me to think that I would be engaged with these conversations with customers for a year or more, and the audit teams have never logged in to an AWS account, ever. And so just as a side note, I would say if you are wondering about this and you really need to figure this out, just get into your AWS account, either create an AWS account or get into your established AWS account, which is what I would really recommend, and start poking around. You learn a lot more about what services are available, what you're using, what kind of instances are running, what security groups look like, what reports are available, all that through this console. These are all the services that are there, and as you click into them, each one has their own console interface that helps you figure that out. So first thing I would say is get an AWS user account and log in. Inventory of assets. Now, it's one of the great things about AWS is the ability to inventory. I mean, in the years I spent at Ernst & Young, I saw, and even with AWS and talking to customers, I saw all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, I was in a major corporation, and I was walking through at night, and they had like a bunch of servers sitting under this guy's desk with a door propped open and a fan blowing out the air and a sign that says, "Don't close this door, my servers will melt." I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, and you really can't inventory. In fact, I used to do software inventory and licensing audits. And the first question was, and 90% of the engagement was, what exactly do you have? And that's a really fundamental question to be able to answer if you're going to do anything else in risk management, really. I was recently talking to a CISO from a European company, and I said, how long would it take you to inventory your assets? And he said, if I started today, it would be 100 years after you are dead. And so, that's one idea of how long it takes people to actually inventory. And some people say, oh, I do it every year, but I've been on those asset inventories. They're like sampling to see if the inventory is accurate by going into the data center and looking at the serial numbers on the server. It's not an effective way to do it. So, in general, this is a great way to inventory assets because everything's there. It's all software driven. AWS Config. It's my new favorite service because what AWS Config does is not only allows you to centrally collect what you have, but also determine what relationships you have with these assets. So it's not just you have 100 servers, it's you have 100 servers, but which ones have certain security groups attributed to them, which ones have EBS volumes attached, what's on those EBS volumes, what kind of network interfaces and subnets you have. These relationships are really key in helping you understand the current state. If you're used to going into somewhere and saying, an auditor will come in, and the first thing they ask for is a network diagram. They always ask. Every single audit in the world asks for that first. And when our auditors come and ask us for a network diagram, you can imagine how we respond because we have, a lot more IT than a typical company. But the first thing they ask for is a network diagram. This is the AWS Config Raw Data. And if you look at this, I didn't make it big because I didn't really want to go through this. But this is if you pulled with the API and got the info on a certain resource, this is the kind of thing you can get. Like what kind of network interfaces, what security group is it in? It's all here in the code. And what AWS Config can do now is take all that information and put it with, like, Second Watch is a good example here, but you can take it and visualize it. So the great thing about this is, here's the new network diagram for your AWS environment. Not only do you have all the assets listed, but also how their logical groups are segregated, which is what's important. The physical, usually network diagrams have a physical diagram of where things are located and where the firewalls are, but this is better than that because it actually shows true permissions no matter where they're located, which obviously physical location doesn't matter. The cool thing about AWS Config also is once an auditor figures this out, they're going to print this off, they're going to put it in their work papers. Next year they're going to come in, they're going to say, I'd like another network diagram so I can match it up to the one that I had in my work papers from last year. You can see here as a report, since the last cycle, here are the differences of the assets and the configurations, which is exactly what an auditor wants to see. Any auditor wants to see this because then they can go in and say, oh, this security group has been altered, there's been added or deleted servers, there's new systems in scope, and this will help them figure that out. So along with that, you get the inventory, you get the different a period in time difference, but it also has alarms and triggers in there that you can then get messages in case somebody changes something that you care about. If someone changes a security group that you care about that's in scope for SOX, then you can see that and get an alert so you can go investigate immediately within the period instead of waiting for the auditor to come in and say, hey, this critical group now has 30 new servers and the permissions have been modified. Another service here is the key management service. I love this service because it really does solve a problem that is super difficult on-premise, is to manage keys. How many of you are really great at this on-premise? Like, in all my years at Ernst & Young, I don't think I ever saw anybody who was really fantastic at this. Even if they did implement a public key infrastructure, it was difficult to rotate keys, to manage keys really, but this solves a lot of problems with compliance as well, because if you can manage keys well, a lot of the other risks and issues that might arise from having a hard, crunchy outside and a gushy inside, it does help solve some of those problems. Trusted Advisor, if you don't know Trusted Advisor, you should make Trusted Advisor your friend, because Trusted Advisor is perfect for auditors who don't know anything, because they can go in and they can look at, they don't know the technical aspect of what's going on, they don't know architecture, they don't know what production servers are being scaled to what, but what they can do is have these trusted advisor checks, at least give them a high-level list of things that they can go check out. If there's security ports that, the security or trusted advisor might say, yeah, this doesn't make sense. You've got some ports open that really you should check it out. It's something for them to go then follow up with the security group. So trusted advisor, we're building new security checks in this all the time, and it's a really great resource for auditors, especially ones that are not super familiar with the technology. Last, AWS SignIn. If you're following best practices and you're federating users, at some point you should limit who can sign into AWS, and you should limit the use of the root account. And there's probably some permissions and groups that you probably want to restrict. You're giving really sensitive permissions, and maybe you don't want people logging in there. There's no reason to. So another really fast and dirty tool is the last AWS sign-in. You really can see who is signed in to what and how recently. AWS CloudTrail. Of course, CloudTrail's been in production for a year now, and it has been fantastic for those customers who really want to look into the audit history or logs of what's been going on in their account. If you're not familiar with CloudTrail, this is actually a Splunk overlay of the CloudTrail raw data, but you can do things like looking at total events, where people are logging in, what kind of users are logging in, like all this stuff that is a visualization of all these massive logs, because you don't really want to go through the logs. They're massive and they're very technical, similar to the ones I showed you before for AWS Config. But Splunk and others are really great at visualizing this and helping auditors do more investigative procedures of clicking into these things, finding out more about what's going on, and then finally clicking into the logs themselves. Credential Reports. This is just another tool that allows you to go in and see who's been logging in, who's using what keys, when their password was last used, are they using MFA? This kind of stuff also helps, and this is a really easy report for someone, an auditor, to look at and evaluate whether or not it's appropriate. Okay, I wish I could just talk, probably a whole talk on policies. The great thing about policies, now policies are usually thought of as, I'm going to write a policy. From an auditor's perspective, I'm going to write a policy. I'm going to say everyone should never copy data to a personal device and take it home. That's a policy, and probably the end of a governance type person's authority. Like the create policies, they're then approved, and how they're actually implemented is just tested during audits. AWS policies are authoritative ways to control access data in a way that's going to automate a lot of controls. Like if you can't really see this really great, but if you went to a policy and saw effect allow action star resource star, you can kind of tell, if you're not familiar with policies, you can still tell what that means. You can do anything on anything. Or action allow S3 put object, S3 get object, S3 delete object, and then for the resources, dev bucket and QA bucket. That's really clear too. You're saying this permission group, everybody in here can only do those three things on those two buckets. This is a great way to compartmentalize security to a point where you don't have a hard outer shell and a soft inner shell, or soft and mushy inside, where somebody pops one server and then they've got free reign of the whole environment. This is a way to compartmentalize how security is built. So if a small compartment is compromised, the blast radius is limited to that one compartment. So I really love policies, and I think that once auditors realize the power of these policies and how they really create an automated control environment, they'll be reviewed and evaluated more and more over time. Okay, so when do you move sensitive data to AWS? This is based on a lot of experience that I've had with interacting with customers. The first thing is you move sensitive data when when the auditors demand improvements. Who in here, don't raise your hand, but who in here has had audits with findings that recur year over year? I said don't raise your hand. But he's proud of it. You know, these audit findings that come up, the auditors will only tolerate them for so long. You can't just keep having the same critical findings over and over and over. And so eventually you're going to have to improve it. You're going to have to do something about it. You're going to have to remediate the issues. You can do that manually, or you can do it via software in AWS. You move sensitive data when you're done with manual controls. Like your manual controls, if your manual controls are failing at an unacceptable rate, then it's time to automate them. I think we all understand this from a conceptual standpoint, but how to implement that is another story. But the capabilities in AWS provide you that ability to do that. When sample testing is not representative, okay, sample testing, like it's kind of a weird thing about auditors. They're kind of forced to do sample testing, and most of them have a cap on how many they'll sample. So if you have 100 changes in the environment, they'll say, oh, we'll sample 5 of them. Or if you have 200, 300, it only gets up to 25 or so until they stop increasing the sample. So if it gets to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or a million changes in your environment, then I don't know how many enterprises would have that, but a sample of 25 is not going to be statistically valid at all. So sample testing, I think, in time will not be effective. It's time to move when your cloud service provider and the partners' solutions are better secure, give you a better security capability than you can do on-premise. I'm a firm believer in architecting and managing to security, not compliance requirements. If you manage a really good secure environment with excellent tools, using as much automation as you can, the compliance and auditor functions will recognize that. The last thing here, when cloud service provider audits can be relied on, and I don't mean from a technical standpoint of yes, you can rely on a SOC 1 report. That's been around for years. It's just that when there's enough precedent to allow that, and for the community of auditors to accept that as an acceptable practice. So which workloads can you move? These are just some examples of the ones that you can move. We've had SEC202 workloads that's related to broker-dealers and their transactions. They have to keep them forever, or keep them in a way that allows for you to read but not write them, and AWS is excellent for that, and NASDAQ, FinCloud does this. 45 CFR 164.312 is the HIPAA security rule. We can demonstrate compliance with the HIPAA security rule, and for our customers, and our customers can then demonstrate it to their regulators or their customers. NIST Special Publication 853 Rev 4 is the security standard for FISMA and for FedRAMP, of course, and for our DoD work. And this is something that obviously anybody subject to this is a very mature area as well. PCI DSS, obviously, very mature also, especially considering that reliance on service providers like AWS, reliance on their PCI work is very clear-cut and accepted by the industry. And then the Directive 9546 EC of the European Parliament has to do with data protection in Europe, and deals with data protection, privacy. We have customers that are complying with this, of course, in Europe. Okay, so I'm just going to give a few examples of some customers that have really been doing some great things in the regulated space. Finra is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and it's one of the largest independent security regulators in the U.S. Their job is to help watch and regulate financial trading practices. It's interesting that Finra is moving to their platform to AWS to analyze and store approximately 30 billion market events a day. 30 billion a day. That's pretty awesome. And for Finra, they've used AWS to comply with what they call the big C and the little c. The big C compliance is their compliance to the regulations and those regulators that are directly regulating them. Little c, the internal standards, internal controls, the internal security requirements that they have. They have, I wish I had more time to talk about it, but they do have, they've done some really cool stuff with their access management system, federation. They've implemented a cool control monitoring program. They use CloudTrail and Splunk to do ongoing management and control monitoring for their environment. Another example is SIAPs. SIAPs guys are here in the back. They're doing something really cool, and I think almost everybody has a personal story about going to a doctor and having the doctor just being amazed that the doctors have a lack of data in this world of having, there's got to be data out there to help them diagnose and treat and, manage outcomes better. SIAPS software enables healthcare providers to deploy these precision medicine programs, and they integrate genomics, clinical data to improve this point of care, diagnosis, treatment, and outcomes. They've done a lot of cool stuff here with their data segregation, data encryption, firewalls, and web application security, and they have these large healthcare providers that are on them, using them, and they're seeing some great things. So that's a really good example as well. Suncorp is another customer of ours that have decided to go all in AWS. This was an interesting one because when they first started, they came out and said last year, we're going to go all in AWS. It made their regulators a little bit nervous, and Suncorp engaged the regulators proactively and ended up getting them comfortable with what they were doing, what controls they had in place, and how they were deploying into AWS. And now the regulators have given them their blessing, and they're moving forward. So this is another example of someone who, had a concern about the regulators not understanding what was going on and was able to resolve it. Another point of innovation is in the Department of Defense. We received provisional authorizations levels 1 through 5 from DISA this last year. And that's, I think, is really going to open the doors to a lot of the defense agencies. It's still it doesn't make it super easy because of a lot of the things that have to happen in order to rely on our work, but we do have customers deploying these sensitive workloads into AWS, and they're achieving military-grade security in a commercial setting. That's a quote from one of the defense agencies. So regulated, sensitive data will be a better fit to be stored and processed in the cloud. I think in about probably 3 or 4 years, this will happen, and the regulators and auditors themselves will be pushing companies to use the cloud. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, sampling will no longer be a valid audit strategy to mitigate risk. It's going to be obsolete. They're going to be pushing for automated controls, software automated controls, and recognizing that the simplicity of using the cloud and using the cloud to secure the cloud is really a benefit to companies and these regulated workloads. So there's a couple auditor trends I'm seeing right now, and I think they're very promising. First, we're no longer saying, what is this cloud thing? We're saying, oh, the cloud, oh, I get it now. You guys aren't just exposing everything to the internet. You're actually extending your environment into an internet-connected data center. Okay, I get it now. They're coming to terms with the cloud. Regulators are coming to terms with what it means and how to create guidance around it. Due diligence. This is really the hard part. Fully understanding cloud architecture is tough, especially if it's new. We still have companies on mainframes, and maybe many of you are still operating mainframes. But yesterday I was talking to a customer, and they said we kind of missed the whole client server phase age, from 1990 to now, and we want to skip that and go to the cloud. So once the due diligence is done, then it becomes easier year over year, and I think we're seeing a lot more of this. Physical access used to be a big issue. We need physical access. And when we've been saying, actually, you don't need physical access, what are you going to do in our data centers? It ends up being that they're convinced that they actually don't need physical access once we explain it to them. We were recently working with an EU customer and their regulator on access rights to AWS and getting that in a contract, the regulator's right to AWS. And the customers are laser focused on, we're required to give access. And when we dug into the regulation and found out that the regulation said the authority must have effective access to data related to the activities as well as to the premises of the service provider. But physical access in AWS does not constitute any logical access. You can't identify the server with the customer in the data center, and you can't identify the hard drives that contain all the data. In fact, since it's sharded, there's no one drive with all the data on it. So I think that once they realized that physical access was actually ineffective access, the regulator and the customer both said, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense," and they relented on that requirement. So I think that's becoming more and more accepted. Objective-based audits. Instead of auditors are moving from auditing what they did last year and auditing the exact controls. They're moving to, we're going to have to step back and look at objectives. What is the objective of our risk management program? What's the objective of this control? You're probably thinking they should have done that anyway, but we're seeing more and more they're forced to because of cloud, because of mobile, because of more distributed data. They're going to have to take a step back and do more objective-based audits. Demand for automation. We do have customers demanding automation because of the fact that it is getting so complex. And adjusting for mobility and the complexity of IT. And then also they're getting smarter. They're seeing what other companies are doing. They're seeing how other companies are moving into the cloud, and they're going to be taking that knowledge and coming to you and saying, I think you can automate here better, and we've seen it in other places. So in that regard, they are getting smarter about the cloud, and they get to see more companies that are doing that. So precedence. Precedence is like legal precedence. If precedence has been established, then auditors get a lot more comfortable, and especially regulators. Regulators get way more comfortable if they've seen it done in other places. If you're the first one, it's always the riskiest, but I don't think anyone's the first one anymore. There's not a first one of any regulated entity doing things in AWS that doesn't have some kind of precedence. This does impact auditors quite a bit. Another precedence is the precedence of reliance. I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was not a strong understanding of the reliance of a SOC 1 report or a SOC 2 report or FedRAMP. No, there's no FedRAMP 3 or 4 years ago, but there is now. And auditors are getting used to relying on a SOC 1 report. They're getting used to using FedRAMP documentation. They're used to looking at the PCI attestation of compliance and being satisfied with that. A couple special mentions on this is, number one, the ISO 9001 certification. That's our quality management system, and this is going to help GXP workloads. This is the healthcare, life sciences industry. This is going to be the first step in helping them achieve GXP compliance. And then this, I mentioned just the CSM levels. The cert itself is around IC2 security, but it enables our customers in DoD to run workloads on AWS. So only have 20 seconds left. Resources for you. I really want to emphasize our website, but also this self-paced quick labs. If you take nothing away, I'd like you to direct you to our website, which in the next couple of days will have this link of this self-paced lab for auditors. And it'll help them get their hands dirty in not the stuff that they don't care about, but the stuff they do care about reviewing user groups, about looking at permissions, about finding out how it's architected. So and it's a free lab. Quick Labs is our vendor that issues these. You double click on it, it launches an instance that's already pre-configured with roles and users and permissions and policies, and you can go in there and look around and do some training. We're actually delivering this training to all of the Big Four in December to help them get more educated. And I think it would be a really good tool to help people in your company understand the cloud, help them, help socialize the use of the cloud, and help them not fear of, moving to the cloud and get a good handle on it. Okay, and there's other reInvent sessions here to review. I'll let you take a picture of that and go back on the videos. There's some really great ones, especially the architecting for HIPAA compliance on AWS. That was Bill Shin. He's a fantastic resource that has a lot of experience there. I think it's helpful. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's great being here, and thank you for staying late. Appreciate it. Take some coffee on the way out. Coffee, cereal.